Welcome to this second free class in a series of 4 free classes on 5G. The topic for today is why isn't our government protecting us from 5G? I'm Larry Burk, a holistic radiologist and certified energy health practitioner. I've been a member of the Duke Radiology faculty for several decades, and back in the 80s and 90s, I was a member of the Society for Magnetic Resonance Imaging Safety Committee and also a member of the Bioelectromagnetic Society. My participation in these two societies influenced my interest in the health effects of electromagnetic fields for the past 30+ years. My website is larryburk.com, and you can find a couple of my 5G blogs there. We're going to start with a tour of the electromagnetic spectrum from 10 hertz or cycles per second up to 10 to the 24th hertz, talking about power line frequencies in the 60 hertz range up to X-ray, gamma, and cosmic rays, which are considered the ionizing radiation segment of the spectrum. Now, the visible light spectrum extends from infrared to ultraviolet, and we're really interested in this range here between 100 megahertz and 100 gigahertz, from very high frequencies to extremely high frequencies. This region is blown up on the screen below from very high frequency TV at 54 megahertz up to 71 gigahertz at the upper end of the 5G range. Also down in this region, we see aircraft and FM radio transmission and ultra-high frequency TV, all below 1 gigahertz. We get up into the cell phone range, slightly above 1 gigahertz, you'll see cellular AMPS, which is the old-fashioned cell phone system, and cellular PCS, which is the more modern cell phone system, and also including Bluetooth. Now, 5G is indicated by the red markers, and there's a low range below 1 gigahertz. There's a mid-range slightly above 1 gigahertz, and then a high range, which ranges up into this region. And particularly of interest is the 60 gigahertz range, which is where we find military applications, including non-lethal energy weapons that are used for crowd control. And if they turn up the power high enough on these frequencies, it'll cause the skin to burn and crowds will disperse rapidly. Military radar is also in this region, which is used to detect threats. That's going to be our place to begin about 60 years ago. And we can see my friend, biologist Alan Fry, who did research on military radar back in the 1960s. I picture him here with Obi-Wan Kenobi, partially due to the facial hair resemblance, but also because they were both fighting the dark side for control of a mysterious force. Alan described the radio frequency phenomenon, and here you can see a military radar installation. And of course, you have Obi-Wan Kenobi fighting Darth Vader for control of the Force in Star Wars. Now, the force that Alan was dealing with was electromagnetic fields and radio frequencies. And the dark side was the Office of Naval Research, who employed him to study military radar installations, because radar operators heard zip, zip in their head, even when there was no sound actually coming from the radar antennas. This was described as the human auditory EMF response, later known as the Fry effect or microwave hearing. In his research with animals, he discovered that the radar disrupted the blood-brain barrier, a highly significant structure in the brain, which when damaged may result in all kinds of negative health consequences. Now, of course, these damaging results were suppressed by the empire, which means at that time, the military was concerned that there were reports circulating in the public about cancer clusters occurring around military radar installations. Now let's fast forward a couple of decades and meet Per Sederback, an Ericsson engineer who was one of the real pioneers of creating cell phone technology for this big telecom company, Sony Ericsson. You can see him pictured here with his shielded suit, which was supposed to protect him from cell phone radiation. Unfortunately for him, there was a cell phone tower right outside his office. He had terrible symptoms of dizziness, nausea, and headaches, including burning sensations and skin rash, to the point where they had to shield his office, his clothes, and his car, which was, of course, a Volvo. Unfortunately, all these measures eventually failed, and he wound up moving out into the wilderness far from any cell phone towers. And to this day, he still will feel like he's going to pass out if anyone turns his cell phone on near him. Now, it wasn't just Sedgwick, it was also, it affected 18 others on his engineering team in 1993, to the point where Ericsson actually published a white paper on hypersensitivity in the workplace. So the industry's known this has been a problem for about 3 decades. His story is nicely told in The Man Who Was Allergic to Radio Waves, an article from Popular Science from 2010, and you can find that with any search engine. Next, we're going to discuss the role of vibrations in this whole process. We all know that tuning forks vibrate resonantly, meaning that if you have one tuning fork at a specific frequency and you hit it such that it vibrates, a tuning fork with the same frequency across the room will start to vibrate by the resonant transmission of energy. Now, this was popularized in the Memorex commercials from many decades ago, featuring Ella Fitzgerald singing just the right note to shatter a glass from across the room. Of course, they were able to reproduce this by capturing the frequency on their tapes. This works because a glass has a resonant frequency, and the voice vibration must match it perfectly. The same thing goes on in your body with EMF or RF frequencies that can resonate with your cells. When this occurs, it can cause calcium channels to open, causing a whole host of biological effects. The key thing here is it doesn't take much power to do this just the right frequency. Now, conversely, a hammer can shatter a glass with force, and just the same way that cells can be disrupted by heat. It's really a brute force approach. And this becomes important in the discussion we have about cell phone science coming up. So meet Carl Blackman, my good friend from North Carolina, who when I met him was president of the Bioelectromagnetic Society back around 1990. At that time, he was the EPA's EMF calcium channel researcher, and in fact, he just retired from the EPA after working there for over 4 decades. His groundbreaking research documented the effects of athermal resonance phenomena on cells, showing that without heating the cells, you could cause calcium channels to open and close with the right frequency. This turned the whole scientific paradigm upside down because the engineers of the day really were attached to the fact that no harm would come unless the cells were heated. Unfortunately, it appears that the Senate Appropriations Committee agreed with the engineers and had passed this statement in 1995. The committee believes the EPA should not engage in EMF activities. Unfortunately, Carl's lab was shut down at its peak. Now, the timing on this decision is particularly important because the following year, the FCC standards were established for safety in the wireless industry. Unfortunately, they were established by engineers and not physicians, so they have very little relevance to actual health concerns. They're also based on an acute, not a chronic exposure. So we're talking about minutes of exposure, not days or weeks or months or even years. That's the practical situation with cell phones. They held fast to the premise of it doesn't heat, it doesn't hurt, and specifically set limits related to the specific absorption rate, or SAR. The limit that they came up with was 1.6 watts per kilogram based on some studies done with basically a crash test dummy or a mannequin simulating a 6-foot, 200-pound man, which has very little relevance to smaller people or children. Now, it's ironic that cell phones these days may even exceed this limit despite what it says on the packaging material from the company. That's why cell phones may get hot in your hand or when you hold them close to your head, which you're not supposed to do anyway. They're supposed to be kept at several inches away from your head. Now, we know that the calcium channels open resonantly at a far lower SAR as determined by Carl and other researchers. So the heating concern is really just the tip of the iceberg compared to the effects that are going on at low power frequencies that interact with your cells. Now, the year 1996 is particularly important, and it's important because the FCC is a captured agency, and it influenced the Telecom Communication Act, which we'll see on the next slide. Now, it's a captured agency, and this guy is the poster child for that concept. Chairman Ajit Pai was a former Verizon lawyer and had significant conflict of interest. The Harvard Center for Ethics has this statement: captured agencies are essentially controlled by the industries they're supposed to regulate. Over the years, the FCC has granted the wireless industry pretty much what it has wanted. The FCC has again and again echoed the lobbying points of major technology interests. Now, as I mentioned, in 1996, the Telecommunications Act was passed, and it had this damaging statement: no state or local government or instrumentality thereof may regulate the replacement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities on the basis of the environmental effects, i.e. health effects, of radio frequency emissions, to the extent that such facilities comply with the Commission's regulations concerning such emissions. We've already stated that 1.6 SAR limit is obsolete and doesn't take into account decades of research on the athermal effects of electromagnetic fields. Unfortunately, the FDA upheld this in 2018, and the FCC reinforced it in 2019, meaning that the EPA, the FDA, and the FCC are all government agencies that have failed to protect us from electromagnetic health concerns. This resulted in lawsuits this year in 2020 from Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense, led by RFK Jr., who's a prominent environmental lawyer. Which brings me to this 2005 movie about a tobacco lobbyist, Thank You for Smoking. Aaron Eckhart plays a devious tobacco lawyer who knows how to present the science in a way that's favorable to the industry. In other words, he's a spin master. And you see him in the movie manipulating the science to the benefit of the industry until that strategy fails and there's multi-million-dollar settlements against the tobacco industry. Now, spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, you see him sitting in a conference room, having lost his job with the tobacco industry, and talking to 3 nervous telecom executives who are concerned about the health effects of their technology. He reassures them, all you have to do is simply repeat after me. Although we are constantly researching the topic, there is no convincing evidence that cell phones cause brain tumors. They look visibly relieved after hearing that. Now, this is an important issue for me because 4 of my friends who were heavy cell phone users died of malignant brain tumors in the last couple of decades. We're talking more about this topic in the upcoming 5G course to follow these free classes. Its title is Staying Healthy in a 5G World, Heal Your Home, Heal Your Body. The next free class will be by Andrew McAfee. How can you decrease 5G coming through your wires? Andrew's an old and close friend of mine who was the first person to introduce me to this concept of electrohypersensitivity, which he's been dealing with for several decades. And he'll give you his latest tips and ideas about how to improve the electromagnetic environment in your house. My topic for the upcoming course is going to be health concerns about cancer and microwave sickness related to 5G exposure. Hope you will all join us for that course.